Hey, everybody, and welcome to this episode 223 of the Thoughttium Navigating Now virtual roundtable series. I'm Anthony Ewing, CEO, co-founder here at Thoughttium, and we are thrilled to be back here at the table every Thursday at 3 p.m. Central. We go live to LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook. We particularly want to welcome our LinkedIn community. This is a growing group of leaders and practitioners across the people, HR, and L&D space that are joining us week over week, and we continue to get the feedback. Keep bringing the topics that matter most to us. And today's topic is a special one. I think it's one that's on all of our minds, not just as people and HR leaders, but as leaders in general. We're going to be talking about HR's challenge with DEIB alignment, and where are we headed with this topic that's at the center of every C-suite table. We have a leader today that is going to help bring this topic in frame and in focus, and we're really excited to welcome Adam Perry, SVP of People Operations at PerkSpot. Adam has been at the center of this topic and so many more as it pertains to enabling and leading people across large organizations and small. And we're happy to have you here in Chicago, Adam.
I'm so grateful for the invitation.
Yeah.
Thank
so you're
you.
in for what, a couple hours, and you're flying back out to Portland, is it?
Flying right out in a few hours.
Okay.
So we're squeezing this right into the day.
That's great. And I heard you say that you are flying home after a trip, and you're most happy to see your two favorite mammals. And who are those two favorite mammals?
That would be my husband, Jason, and our cat, Daisy, for sure. So my Instagram is filled with pictures of them. So
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. Well, we're so happy to have you here at the table. And, it's funny, before we went live, you and I were connecting, and, I was almost just admitting that this topic, DEIB alignment, is not only one that, we have been trying to immerse ourselves in and really stay up to speed on, and the implications of creating the most inclusive environment for our team, on our team. And it seems like today it's this mountain that's like almost overbearing.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about, how we can potentially frame DEIB, the challenge and the opportunity today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much. So I'd just say that, this is one man's opinion and my kind of lived experience. And I know there's lots of HR professionals out there that are thinking about this topic and mulling it over and might reach different conclusions than me. And I think that that's super important to acknowledge up front. But I think, the frame that comes to mind around this is, the DEI kind of orthodoxy and the orthodox views that have been really emerging and building over the last 20 years, I think are starting to shift and evolve. And that's a consequence of social and political change. I think it's a consequence of the pace at which business is shifting and changing. And so I think often with DEIB, it's starting to get framed as a either or choice, that we need to be all in. DEI's got to be our headline, or wow, we need to not touch this with a 10-foot pole. Yeah. And I think the reality is there's kind of pros and cons of taking either of those approaches. And I'm hoping we can get into that a little bit.
Yeah. Before we do that, let's, we have folks that span small organizations, large organizations, people leaders, CEOs, all the way down to individual contributors. The B in DEI and B is belonging, which might be new to a lot of us. So tell us about the B and how that maybe rounds this out, or how we should be thinking about belonging.
Yeah, I think the B was a sort of late addition, I think, to the diversity, equity, and inclusion frame. And really, what the B is kind of intended to represent is that sense of community that organizations are also often striving for. And it sort of wasn't captured in the sort of core mechanism of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So belonging kind of speaks to this feeling part of a community within our organizations, and how do we foster that through our DEIB strategies? Yes,
I love that. And that, to your point, that almost allows us to think of, this topic as truly building a community. I like that word community, building a community within your organization. If you were not building a company and you were building a community, what would you do different? Is a really interesting question to ask.
Yeah.
Even myself as a CEO, right? We say that Thougtium's a platform for passionate practitioners to come in and express their best work, to work with our clients in unique ways, and to develop themselves as humans and individuals. But if I were to go to one step further and say that Thougtium were a community, both our team, our clients, and our second and third degree, it does bring in some of those challenging questions of how inclusive are you with this community? How safe is this community? How open and inviting is it? And I wonder if that's what the B is helping us do.
Yeah, I think I think actually belonging has been a great kind of addition to that framework, because it becomes another B word. It becomes a bridge to helping to get beyond this DEI being about, representation specifically, but more about how do I bring as many voices to the table as I possibly can, and actually feel that we've created an environment or a community where everyone can bring their whole self. Yeah. And I'm not leaving anything at the door. Yep. And then how do we manage that within our organizations in a really healthy way? Because at the end of the day, if I feel a sense of belonging, that implies that there's a shared set of values that kind of connects us all. Yeah. And it doesn't mean we give up our individuality. It doesn't mean that we agree on every single topic, but it means that, hey, there's a golden thread here that we've built together, and we've done that in a thoughtful way that creates that sense of, I belong here. Yeah. This is a place that welcomes me. This is where I can grow and contribute in a powerful way.
Yeah. Whether this is, right or wrong, there seems to be this collective sense of trepidation when even bringing this topic up. Yeah. Even in closed boardrooms with a small group of leaders that are truly looking out for the rest of the organization, this seems to be a tricky topic. So I guess one question that I might ask you, Adam, is are there almost out of the gate do's and don'ts when we are talking DEIB amongst leaders or even within our organizations? Are there things that we should stay away from, or maybe even best practices in how to bring this topic to the strategic table?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I had the opportunity last year to meet with a couple of my colleagues, other HR leaders from other companies, and we were talking about DEI. We had launched a year or 18 months ago, we had launched a DEI council at my business, and we were struggling with how to sort of sustain that over the long run. And there were some challenges associated with that. And I was going to this group to be like, here's the challenge that I'm wrestling with. And it's frustrating. And I want this to be something meaningful. How are you all handling this topic? And what I heard from that group of HR leaders was, wow, thank you for saying something. We feel frustrated. We feel like there's no correct way to go forward. We feel like we don't want to be the word police. We don't want to be the behavior police. We don't want to alienate people. So I think we're in a moment right now where I think there is a lot of fear associated with talking about DEI in the right way to the right people. And I do think that is a real problem for HR professionals. That when we're dealing with people and leadership and culture and collaboration, if there's a fear layer there in our organizations and with our leadership, it becomes really hard to maintain authenticity. Authenticity goes right out the door, and now we're kind of manufacturing language, we're manufacturing alignment rather than having open conversations. What are the goals that we're trying to achieve as a team? What do we want good to look like in collaboration? What do we want good to look like when we're interacting with customers or clients? And I think we're in a moment where rather than leading with the language of diversity and inclusion, I think we need to lead with what are the outcomes we're driving for, and how does that show up in behavior? Yeah. Because then with the behaviors at the foundation of what we're doing, we can build a framework that brings us to an inclusion strategy, but it might not use that word. Yeah. Bring us to a belonging strategy, but it might not use that word. And I think HR people have to get comfortable disconnecting themselves from the sort of orthodox language of DEIB.
Yeah, that's so interesting, because you've got me thinking about, does a DEIB strategy always need to be crafted, built, maintained outside of the organizational strategy? It feels like it's always been this, kind of like separate function within organizations. It's always been a separate plan. That plan has always been in flight, and maybe there's some alignment to the corporate strategy. But is it time maybe for organizations to think of more of that integration?
Yeah, you're making me smile, Anthony, because I think that's kind of exactly where my head is at. Yeah. And as I think about conversations I've had, not only with leaders at my company, but leaders in other organizations. So, one of the competencies that I think is important for any successful business is the ability to hold tensions around difficult topics, difficult decisions. So whether it's how are we going to compete when our competitors are pressing in on us, what choices do we have to make about that? Sometimes we have the choice between two not great options or two really expensive options or whatever it is. Or how do we make a decision about a strategic direction that we want to take the business, knowing there's 3 or 4 or 100 ways we could grow a business. So what I think that I want to encourage our HR professionals to think about is your leaders need to have this competency to be successful in business of holding those tensions around choices. And I think topics around DEIB and culture fall in that same category. We're having to make choices. And I think the only thing that's really different is we're thinking about, behaviors, which often falls in this kind of soft skills category and feels fuzzier. But to me, it's the same capability. So I want to encourage HR professionals when you're talking to your leaders to sort of think like an owner and think about how is managing the tension and making choices inside culture going to help a business grow, help us achieve our strategic goals more rapidly, more efficiently. And hopefully we have a cultural layer that makes it fun to work at the organization where we have growth opportunities. So I think there's just it can't be built outside the business strategy. But you need to find a language that brings it into the business strategy rather than it being, well, HR's got a DEI strategy and they're just going to run with it.
I love that. I don't want to put you on the spot, but to get more specific, I wonder if we could come up with an example of a DEIB aligned business strategy, something that would enable greater business outcomes. Like what's an example?
Well, I'll give you an example from PerkSpot. So we refreshed our values about 1.5 years ago, and we were looking at, the business has been around for a long time, and we looked at, hey, what kind of business do we want to be for this next stage of growth? For this next stage of PerkSpot. And one of the early ideas that we had in thinking about values, we were thinking about diversity and inclusion and where does this sit in the cultural narrative of the business? And one of the ideas that came to the table was, how do we let the best ideas win? And so that idea of letting the best ideas win, what does that mean in practice? So
how are we harvesting the best ideas?
Absolutely. And who's in the room and who's at the table and how do we make decisions? So we kind of confronted this. Now, in the end, that sort of morphed into our value of be scrappy. So the idea there is valuing diverse perspectives. It's making sure that we're soliciting and building and making decisions around those great ideas. And that's just one small example of that is, for all intents and purposes, a DEI value, but it's couched in the language of the business and what we want to drive.
Yeah, I love that. You're almost, again, maybe what I was initially looking for was more of like an ROI type of a correlation. But I think your point's a good one. Get down to like, what is enabling some of our organizational goals? And if our organizational goal is to innovate or create, new products this year that we didn't have last year, how are you getting to those new products? What's feeding that innovation pipeline, and who's actually at the table generating some of those new ideas? So I love that kind of like top-down approach.
Well, what I would add to that, I think your question around ROI is well framed. I think what's important is, what's the end that you have in mind as a business? Because it might be, in order to live a value of let the best ideas win, you might actually have to slow down some of your processes. You might have to add extra rounds of stakeholder or project management. So you might be a business that says, well, we don't want to do that. We want to reduce bureaucracy, increase speed. We're okay with experimentation, with a culture of taking big swings, high risk, high reward. So that would drive a different values frame. And that might then allow you to embed inclusion in a different way. So
that's great.
And what's great about that is, when you think about DEIB in that way, you are now releasing yourself of the pressure to use a particular dictionary or set of terms or set of philosophical principles that we call DEIB, but really is not going to serve the business. It's going to be a forced fit. And that's when you are going to struggle to get buy-in. That's when you're going to struggle to get leaders to be champions of your inclusion approaches.
This might be taking us in a different direction, but you've got me thinking about what are some of the day-to-day conversations that you're having with people leaders today that maybe you weren't having 18 or 24 months ago?
Yeah, I think it comes down to when I think about in the lens of DEIB specifically, I think that, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, when I was running inclusion strategies in a previous company, a lot of the conversations were around representation. purely around representation. How do we get the numbers to reflect demographic goals? And I think these days, what I'm pleased about with the evolution of DEI is I think DEI practitioners, HR practitioners are so much more savvy today about using their seat at the table to say, hey, we want our HR and people strategies to be at the center of how we grow the business. So I do think there's been a real evolution there, which I'm happy to see.
Are there conversations that your people leaders are sending up the chain that are a little bit more, or issues, challenges, opportunities that are a little bit more direct, candid, transparent today than they were 18 or 24 months ago? I feel like the transparency is starting to increase just in terms of people leaders wanting to be in the conversation, wanting to do the right things, make the right decisions, have the right conversations.
Well, what's been interesting about the post-pandemic universe that we find ourselves in is it's starting to spark a lot more questions about how do organizations set themselves up for success and run their businesses the way they want to, but meet the needs, the more unique needs of families, of employees. And so I think there's a lot of the management conversations that I hear coming up are like, I have an employee who has 2 kids and is wrestling with childcare options and opportunities, and that's going to create scheduling conflicts and challenges. So how are we going to address those kinds of issues? So I think, not only is the sort of social and cultural landscape out in the wider world impacting conversations about DEI, we have the pandemic, we have all kinds of things that are generating new conversations and forcing organizations to think differently about, that was something I sort of ignored 6 or 7 years ago. And now I have to think about, you're right. Like our policies maybe aren't very family centric. And what do we want to do about that? And what I want to encourage companies and HR leaders to think about is just be clear, because it's also okay to say, hey, we have this minimum expectation. And we also recognize that there are people whose lives will not be able to conform to that. And maybe there's other places to work that will be better positioned to meet those needs. And that's a hard thing to say.
Yeah, sure.
And yet I think we're in an age where that clarity is more important than ever. And companies need to be willing to stand on their principles.
Yeah, clear as kind for sure. You've also got me thinking about, are we enabling our people leaders to have the right conversations? And are we also enabling our people leaders with the right skills and capabilities to navigate some of these waters, right? And so, at Thoughtium, we have this huge focus on what we're calling new required skills of today's leader. And they're a lot different than they were a couple of years ago. I mean, even 12 months ago. One of our hottest offerings right now, by the name of situational intelligence, is focused on these new required skills. And we're bringing concepts and skill sets in resilience and agility and influence, these universal skills, to not just people leaders, but everybody in the organization, as a way to unlock just their ability to communicate more effectively, their ability to connect. And we used to call these soft skills, right? Which they were almost the kind of like disposable skills.
It sounds like a pejorative these days. Totally. They're just soft skills.
Yeah, but there are what we now call required skills. And we're doing a lot in the communication effectiveness space to open organizations' ability for people to reach across the org, have the hard conversation, lead with authenticity. What's great, I think, is we live in a world today where I think a lot of people are doing a lot of this work as part of their own individual development. But as organizations, we have the responsibility to bring some of these skills to our folks too.
Totally. And I think what's important about everything that you said is like, we need partners like Thoughtium that are bringing to the table this mindset of what we're trying to do is harmonize strategy with what we expect of leaders and the experiences we create that make all of that work. So I think HR people need to be thinking about how are they going to meet the needs of the business and bring with them a new toolkit. Or acquire a new toolkit, however they're going to do that. So I think it's tremendous opportunity. I was talking a little bit earlier about, the fear that HR professionals might be feeling, or even leaders might be feeling around topics of DEI. And fear is awful, and who wants to be scared of anything? But fear should create an opportunity as well, because fear also equates to uncertainty. Now we've got this uncertainty about how do I move forward with this topic? How do I have this difficult conversation with my leader about being a workplace that is more welcoming to women and families, as an example. And so, wow, what a difficult but important conversation to have. Let's seize that opportunity. So I think HR people have to be more courageous. And when you're feeling the fear about certain topics, that's the signal that, wow, I need to find a way to go talk about this.
I love that. And maybe to round out the discussion today, I want to ask for those organizations that maybe have identified that they're taking more of a programmatic approach to DE&I, that there is a need to integrate more of where the organization is headed with this incredibly important responsibility that we have to create DEIB. Where should we start? Like, and I think you mentioned earlier a great place, which is what are our organizational goals and how can we potentially support those? But even before that, you got a group of leaders in a room. They've maybe self-identified that we've got a lot of work to do in this space. They've also identified that like this is kind of tricky waters.
Yeah.
What are just some of like the conversation starters for a group of leaders that just want to do more work in this space?
Yeah, I think question number one is always, what kind of business do you want to be? And what kind of leader do you want to be? You've got to start there because the conversations around culture, DEI, collaboration, leadership, whatever it is, like you need to be extremely clear about, are we a people first business? Are we a customer first business? Are we going to go over above and beyond to meet people where they're at in terms of their lifestyle or their working preferences? Are we going to be a fully remote place? Are we going to be totally in the office? So I think there are really basic questions that we love to gloss over because they're sort of boring and inane and sort of like, wow, these are really simplistic questions. But my goodness, if you get clarity on those foundational questions for your business, so much becomes easier. Much easier. And then if you can find the right partners, whether that's Thoughtium or whoever you work with, that can be the force multiplier to help you move forward.
That's great. Thank you, Adam. I feel like we could sit in this topic for hours, but I do want to round the episode out with a little bit of a lightning round.
Okay.
I feel like we jumped right into the topic at hand and we didn't get to know you.
Okay. All right. So may get more than you bargained for.
Although we do know your two favorite mammals, which I think is a really fun fact for all of us.
Hey, Daisy and Jason. I should have said my husband's name first. What was I thinking?
Order of priority here. So I'm just going to ask you a couple of quick kind of hot seat questions. And first thing that comes to mind, what's something that you are reading, watching, or listening to today that you're really geeking out about? And it doesn't have to do anything with work if it's something that you're just pumped about personally.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been watching the latest season of Severance. So really loving that. And very pumped for The Last of Us season 2, which is coming out really soon. And I've been on a tour of some of the childhood books that have been my favorite. So I'm going back and rereading the Wheel of Time series.
Interesting.
So very excited about
that. What are some other childhood books that you're looking into? For me, it was the Hardy Boys.
Hardy Boys. Wow.
Might be dating me.
Yeah. I'm a really big fan of Terry Brooks. In fact, as a result of this trip, I missed his signing. He's was signing autographs back home in Portland at our local bookstore. So darn it, missed that one, but awesome. It was more important to be here with you all.
I love it. Well, thank you again for being here. Tell us maybe a skill or an ability that you see as an opportunity for a lot of people leaders. Like, what's a skill out there that we people leaders are maybe overlooking? Or if you had to almost like install a specific skill in all people leaders, what would it be?
This is gonna be the pot calling the kettle black a little bit, but learn to kind of shut up sometimes.
Ooh,
and let the room have some dialogue. Cause I think leaders love to create a pressure cooker in a group setting, and sometimes just setting back and letting other people generate ideas and bring thoughts to the table. I think that's a great way to win and a great skill for leaders, clearly not demonstrated enough.
It's so easy to say and understand. It's so hard to do. Yeah. When you're in a room and, you kind of feel that pressure of the eyes looking at you to make sure that you're not just filling air with words.
Yeah. Well, and I'd also just say, like, if you frequently sit in rooms where people are looking at you waiting to make a decision, you're probably not doing the right thing, because you need to be empowering people, and you might become the single point of failure. You might be the reason why things are moving slow. So just keep an eye on that.
I love that tip.
Pro tip.
Favorite holiday meal?
Oh my goodness. I am a huge fan of a Christmas ham.
Ooh,
like a spiral honey ham at Christmas. My goodness. Yeah. My mother and grandmother can't beat it.
I love that.
Yeah.
All right. Last question. We want you to think of a word that describes what you admire most about yourself. And I want you to finish this statement.
Okay.
If the world were a lot more like Adam, it would be what?
Oh, wow. You're really catching me on the spot there. I did not get these questions in advance, I promise. I think open-minded. I would put open-minded as the word. And I think if the world were a little bit more like Adam, we'd be making a lot more friends, and we'd be learning a lot more about life experiences different from ours. I think we'd have a richer existence in this world, and I think we'd be a lot nicer to each other.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's a very informed answer, which I think says a little something about your self-awareness, which is great. A lot of people struggle with that question. I've also been very fascinated with some of these self-talk exercises that can be really potent.
Yeah.
Like really saying out loud, what you admire about yourself, what you're doing well, can get hard for people.
Yeah. Well, my husband's a psychotherapist, and so he's been promoting the positive self-talk with me for a long time. So I'm still working on it. He's still coaching me, but we're getting better day by day.
Good. Well, Adam, thank you so much for being a part of this episode and now the Navigating Now community. We're just thrilled to have you. And I know after today's episode, we're going to sit down and chop it up even more. I just love sitting next to true practitioners. Those folks that treat their work like an art form or a craft. That's how we define practitionership. And Adam, I can tell you're a practitioner. So thank you very much for joining.
Thank you, Anthony.
Yeah. And we want to thank you all for joining this episode 223 of the Thought Team Navigating Now virtual roundtable series. Again, we go live every Thursday at 3 p.m. Central. You can find this episode and previous episodes at thoughtteam.com/live. We'll see you next Thursday.